Turning 68 didn't seem like a cause for grand celebrations. But deep down, I hoped for at least a touch of affection. I prepared a simple afternoon snack in the old house in Albany, an almond cake, a bottle of wine saved for special occasions, and the table set with the porcelain plates I'd cared for so diligently. I imagined an intimate atmosphere, with my son, Harlan, and his wife, Cassidy, reminiscing about past times and sharing a toast to the future. At first, everything proceeded with a certain normalcy. Harlan arrived with a hurried bouquet of flowers. Cassidy, with a box wrapped in shiny paper. I lit the candles on the cake, and in that moment, I thought there still existed a thread of tenderness binding us. But soon, the atmosphere shifted. They'd invited a couple of neighbors without even consulting me. And the house, which I'd maintained with such care, filled with unrelated conversations and curious glances. It was then that Harlan, with a glass in hand, smiled strangely and said aloud, "Well, Mom, enjoy this birthday a lot, because it'll be the last one you celebrate here." The silence grew thick. I tried to laugh nervously, convinced it was a tasteless joke. But Cassidy added without hesitation, "Yes, Elowen, we've thought that the best thing is for you to start looking at some assisted living facilities. At your age, you'd be better cared for and more comfortable." I felt the blood drain from me all at once, as if they'd emptied my chest. I saw the uncomfortable looks from the neighbors, some averting their eyes, others biting their lips. No one intervened. I remained standing, with the candle still lit in front of me, unable to blow it out. My own house, where I'd raised Harlan, where every corner held the memory of my deceased husband, suddenly became the stage for my exile. I didn't respond. I swallowed my pain as best I could, keeping silent. I smiled weakly so the guests wouldn't notice the tremor in my hands. I only thought of one thing if they'd decided to expel me. I'd have to find a way to ensure they didn't keep what they considered theirs by right. That same night, when everyone had left, I went up to the attic alone and opened the old chest where I kept the house documents. When the door closed behind the last guest, silence enveloped me like a rough blanket. I walked slowly down the hallway, brushing my fingertips against the walls that had witnessed my life. There, still visible, were the pencil marks Harlan had made as a child to measure his height. I traced them with my eyes and felt my heart shrink. Each stroke was a reminder of happy afternoons, of laughter that now seemed so distant. In the living room, the table still held the scent of spilled wine and shame. The furniture I'd chosen with my late husband remained in place, sturdy and silent, like mute accomplices to my defeat. The photograph of our wedding, framed in silver, returned a serene gaze to me, as if he were inviting me not to give up. I then headed to the attic. The stairs creaked under my feet, and dust floated in the air like a suspended memory. I searched among old boxes until I found the wooden chest I'd always guarded jealously. I opened it with trembling hands, fearing and desiring at once what I might find. Inside rested the original deeds to the house, signed decades ago, with my name and my husband's as the sole owners. Next to them, a yellowed envelope contained a forgotten insurance policy that was still valid. A shiver ran through me that house wasn't a guaranteed inheritance for Harlan, nor a trophy for Cassidy. It was still mine. I carefully stored the documents, like someone protecting a silent weapon. I understood that I still had power, and that power could be the key to responding to the disdain without needing to shout or beg. I descended from the attic with the chest pressed against my chest. The house, full of echoes, returned strength to me in every corner. For the first time in a long while, I breathed deeply and felt that the answer wouldn't lie in arguing with them, but in moving the pieces in another way. That night, as the clock struck 12, I decided to prepare my move in silence. In the following days, Harlan and Cassidy showed more attentiveness than usual. They arrived with forced smiles, brought fresh bread from the neighborhood bakery, and spoke to me in a soft tone that wasn't natural for them. One afternoon, they even invited me out for coffee. And while we flipped through newspapers on the terrace of the town square, Cassidy slid an envelope full of colorful brochures across the table. "They're beautiful assisted living places, Elowen," she said in her honeyed voice. "Some have views of the countryside, others cultural activities. You'd be very well accompanied." I nodded in silence, feigning interest. I turned the pages one by one, observing the images of smiling seniors playing cards, gardens full of flowers, and perfectly ordered rooms. I smiled too, but inside, the discomfort grew like a shadow. Harlan reinforced the speech. "Mom, think that it would be for your own good. Here you're alone, and in those places, you'd have doctors nearby and company." I didn't argue. I tucked the brochures into my purse and thanked them for their concern with a calm that disconcerted them. They believed they'd planted the idea, unaware that inside me, the seed was something very different. That same night, while organizing the dishes in the kitchen, I heard their voices in the living room. They didn't realize I'd left the door ajar. "If we can get her to move soon, we can use the house as collateral for the loan," Cassidy said in a practical tone. "Of course," Harlan replied. "With that guarantee, the bank won't make problems." I froze. The betrayal had a clear face. It wasn't just about pushing me aside, but about squeezing what for me was a home full of memories. The pain transformed into something new. Firmer, a spark of rebellion, a small but determined fire that began to burn in my chest. That night, as I turned off the lights and went up to my room, I no longer felt defeated. I knew the time had come to play my hand in silence, with the deeds in my grasp. The next morning, I dressed calmly, as if it were any ordinary day, and headed toward downtown Albany. I crossed the cobblestone streets with the serenity of someone running a trivial errand. But inside, I felt a knot in my stomach. I arrived at the office of the notary who'd worked with my husband in life, Mr. Aurelius, a man with neatly groomed gray hair and a firm gaze who always inspired confidence in me. I explained my situation with measured words, trying not to let the emotion gripping my throat escape. He reviewed the papers I handed him and nodded calmly. "Elowen, the property is still in your name. No one can lift a finger without your consent." I felt a deep relief, as if I'd regained my breath after weeks of holding it. I clutched the deeds between my hands and knew that document was my shield. I left there and secretly dialed the number of a real estate agent recommended by an acquaintance. We met at a discreet coffee shop, far from the neighborhood where everyone might gossip too much. The woman, named Clara, listened to me attentively and took notes efficiently. She assured me she could find an interested buyer in a matter of weeks. I returned home with a serene face, ready to play my role. Harlan and Cassidy were waiting for me with new brochures for assisted living facilities. I smiled, nodded, asked superficial questions about activities and amenities, and even tucked some pamphlets into my wallet to make it seem like I was taking it seriously. But inside, I'd already made my decision. While they talked about my future care, I thought about the market price of the home, the hands that would embrace it, and the plane ticket that would soon take me far away. That night, alone in my room, I cried silently, not for the loss, but for the certainty that I had to detach myself from the last root tying me to my son. And amid the tears, I understood that selling the house was no longer just a plan. It was my only way out. The day of the signing dawned cold, but inside me burned a strange fire. a mix of nerves and determination. I arrived punctually at the notary's office with the documents under my arm, and there, waiting for me, were Clara, the real estate agent, and a young couple radiating enthusiasm. They were named Landon and Harper, and from the first handshake, I felt a sincere warmth. They told me, almost unable to contain their excitement, that they'd been dreaming for years of moving to Albany for work, but their hearts remained in Las Vegas, where they had all their family. They wanted the house to be their first stable home, the place to raise the children they longed to have. Hearing them speak with such enthusiasm moved me. I signed the papers with a steady hand, and as the pen left definitive strokes on the contract, a part of me detached from the past. It wasn't a bitter detachment. It was like handing over a treasure to those who would know how to care for it. When Harper looked at me and said, "We promise this house will always have life and laughter," I felt a stab of peace pierce my chest. While I stored my copy of the deed, a coincidence hit me hard. My late husband, Everett, had repeated for years the same dream to live facing the desert in Las Vegas, where the sound of the wind through the canyons would accompany us each morning. In that instant, I understood it wasn't just a change of address. It was as if life were offering me the chance to finally fulfill that shared desire. That same afternoon, without wasting a minute, I entered the airport with the determination of someone who no longer fears destiny's twists. I bought a direct ticket to Las Vegas and tucked it into my purse with a deep sigh. As I stepped out onto the street, Albany's chilly air no longer weighed on me. I felt my steps leading me not to an end, but to the beginning of a path I'd been waiting for all my life. The Nevada sun welcomed me with a different light, warmer and more enveloping than any memory of Albany. As I stepped off the plane and felt the dry breeze on my skin, I had the certainty that I'd taken the right step. I wasn't arriving in flight, but seeking a place to start over. I settled into a modest apartment overlooking the Strip. It wasn't luxurious, but every morning, when I opened the shutters, the glow of the neon lights multiplied the brightness on the white walls. From my balcony, I watched the crowds come and go, and that urban rhythm began to soothe the wound still bleeding inside me. The first days I dedicated to walking aimlessly. I discovered the downtown farmers market, with its stalls overflowing with colorful fruits and vendors offering the day's fresh produce. Amid aromas of freshly baked bread and spices, I felt life regaining flavor. One afternoon, arriving at the fountains of Bellagio, the illuminated water show against the city skyline left me breathless. Its dancing jets reflected the sunset light like fire, and I thought Everett, my husband, would have smiled to see me fulfilling his dream of being amid the vibrancy of the desert city. It was during one of those walks that I met Thaddeus Whitaker, my neighbor from the building, an older man with white hair and a deep voice, who greeted me with the courtesy of someone who's lived among books. He told me he'd been a history professor and that, after being widowed, he found solace in conversing with newcomers. "The city knows how to heal wounds, Elowin," he said with serenity, "but only if one opens to the new without fear." I accepted his invitation for coffee at the nearby plaza, and soon I discovered in him not just a guide to knowing the city, but an unexpected companion. With his tales of pioneers, gamblers, and Vegas legends, he began to plant in me the idea that I could still write a new chapter. That night, returning home, the hum of the city no longer sounded like a reminder of solitude, but like a prelude to possibilities. Thaddeus told me about a neighbor named Juniper Hale, a vibrant woman with curly hair and a clear voice, who organized cultural gatherings in a small venue next to the Olive Plaza. I accepted the invitation with some shyness, fearing I'd feel like an outsider there too. However, upon entering, the first thing that enveloped me was a long table covered with notebooks, coffee cups, and laughter that rang like freed bells. Juniper welcomed me with a warm hug, as if she'd known me forever. Soon I learned that circle was formed by women of different ages, mostly older, who shared a common history. They'd been displaced, forgotten, or underestimated by their own families. I heard stories of daughters who never called, husbands who'd vanished, grandchildren they barely knew. When my turn came, I hesitated, but seeing so many attentive eyes, I let the words flow. I told them how my son had thrown me out on my birthday, how I'd discovered they planned to mortgage my house, and how I'd decided to sell it and move to the city. My voice trembled, but with each sentence, I felt the weight lighten. When I finished, a respectful silence turned into spontaneous applause. Several women approached to tell me my courage reminded them that it was still possible to start anew. It was the first time in a long while that I didn't feel alone in my pain. Soon I integrated into their workshops, in one on writing. I rediscovered the passion for filling pages with thoughts and memories. In another, on gardening, my hands, once accustomed to the dust of the old house, now sank into the moist soil, planting flowers and aromatic herbs. Each seed planted was a symbol of my own reconstruction. There, amid words and new roots, I discovered that my pain could become something more, the strength to help others rebuild their lives. That night, I returned to my apartment with the certainty that I was putting down roots in different but fertile soil, where my story was just beginning to bloom. The phone rang in the middle of the night, yanking me from the light sleep that often visits me since arriving in the city. I answered with a constricted heart, fearing bad news. On the other end, I heard Harlan's broken voice. My son. Mom, the bank has foreclosed on the house. His breathing was ragged, almost like a child trapped in a nightmare. He explained between sobs that he'd taken out a loan counting on the home as collateral. Now, upon learning it was no longer in his name, the creditors had acted mercilessly. Cassidy left, he added in a threat of a voice. She says she won't stay by a ruined man's side. She left me alone. Mom, I have nowhere to go. I rested my forehead in the palm of my hand, feeling a whirlwind of emotions. For years, I'd waited to hear a word of regret. And now I had it before me, raw, tinged with desperation. Mom, help me, he pleaded. Only you can. I breathed deeply, letting a prolonged silence settle between us. When I spoke, my voice wasn't one of reproach, but firm calm. Harlan, the house is no longer mine, nor yours. It belongs to those who respect it. On the other end, only a choked sob was heard. I closed my eyes, holding back the tears fighting to escape, and hung up with the same serenity as one closes doors that should never have been opened that way. I sat in the darkness, with the city lights flickering softly against the nearby buildings. For the first time, I understood that the past couldn't be saved with late promises. I'd chosen my path, and he'd have to find his, even if through solitude. I stood up, opened the window, and let the desert breeze dry my cheeks. And in that instant, I knew that call wouldn't be the last, for open wounds always find a way to bleed again. The hours after Harlan's call became a back and forth of thoughts, hitting me with the same force as the wind whipping against the high-rises. On one hand, the mother in me still wanted to extend a hand, protect him from the solitude he'd dug himself, but at the same time, the wounded woman inside me cried out for dignity, reminding me of every humiliation, every disdain. I spent the mornings walking along the strip, letting the heat warm my sandals, as if the sun could wash away my doubts. One afternoon, Thaddeus accompanied me in silence. Seeing me so absorbed, he said with his usual calm, "Elowen, guilt is another form of prison. If you accept it, no city will be vast enough to free you." His words sank deep. I understood my life couldn't be reduced to being the jailer of my own remorse. Soon after, Juniper sought me out with her inexhaustible energy. She told me they were planning an oral history project, a living archive of women who'd been made invisible, so future generations could hear their voices and learn from their struggles. "We want you to coordinate it, Elowen," she said. "You have strength and a story that deserves to guide others." I was speechless. For years, I'd relegated my passions, my abilities, to the shadow of others, first Everett, then Harlan, even the social expectations dictating what a woman my age should do. And now I was offered the chance to turn my pain into a legacy. I accepted, with a lump in my throat and a smile I didn't remember feeling in a long time. That night, returning to my apartment, the hum of the city no longer seemed an echo of solitude, but a distant applause accompanying the start of a new stage, and I felt, with an unexpected serenity, that life was giving back what I'd once thought lost. With part of the money from the sale in Albany, I decided to take the step I'd been imagining since arriving in the city. I bought a small house on the outskirts of Las Vegas. It was modest, with whitewashed walls and blue shutters. But what made it special was the view. From the terrace, the horizon opened in an infinite canvas of sand and sky. I filled it with flowers, as if each pot were a reminder that I could still bloom at any age. Roses climbed the facade, and inside, I hung photographs of Everett, my husband. His smile from the frames seemed to welcome me every time I crossed the door. I wanted that place to be not just a personal refuge, but also a space for others. Thus was born the community workshop we dreamed of with Juniper, a corner where women and children could gather, read, write, paint, or simply share silences. On the inauguration day, the air filled with laughter, small footsteps, and voices that broke any shadow of solitude. I watched them emotionally, understanding that my home had regained meaning. One afternoon, while arranging notebooks on the newly installed shelves, I heard a timid knock at the door. Upon opening it, I found Harlan. He was gaunt, with wrinkled clothes and eyes tired from so much crying. For an instant, time stopped. It was my son, the same one who'd marked the walls of our old house as a child, and the man who'd exiled me on my birthday. I breathed deeply. I felt the impulse to bar his way, but something stronger led me to keep the door ajar. It wasn't the house I was willing to open, but the dialogue we'd never had. He lowered his gaze, murmuring barely, "A mom," and I, with my heart divided between wounds and love, invited him into the garden, where the desert seemed to erase the footprints of the past to make room for a new beginning.